Let's all stand and sing hymn number 476, In the Garden.
Today, certainly want to continue to pray for. Go ahead.
Just wanted to thank you for all their hard work and everybody who participated in the fundraiser. Terry really enjoyed the cards. Thank you, guys.
Very good. I know some of y'all didn't hear that. David said, thank the church or the youth for the hard work on the spaghetti dinner and the card that they sent to Terry. So that's good. It's good to see Bobby here. I was surprised, but certainly good to see you. All right, and I know you'll be going Wednesday, so we'll keep you in prayer for there. Who else? Let's be praying for Virgil. Let me make sure I get this right. So Virgil been having a tough week or so, and so he went the other day. He's on oxygen now 24/7. His lymph nodes were enlarged from the scan, but the scan found more spots on his lungs. It could be the inflammation from the chemo. So right now the chemo has been stopped for 8 weeks, and so we just need to certainly continue as we have been, but we need to continue to pray for Virgil and Kathy. Okay, Janet. Okay, Janet and Betty. Been down to see Eva, so they'll be heading back tomorrow. Pray for their safe trip. Who else? Okay. Benny's brother will be having surgery on Thursday. Scott's mother, yes, going through some tough times, so let's certainly remember her. It's certainly good to see Brother Mark here today. We sure have missed you, and so I'm glad you pushed through and came. So it's good to see you, partner. Who else? I know I'm forgetting somebody. Somebody help me. Dexter, yes. And Lois. And Nick. And there's somebody else. Debbie. Anybody else? Okay. You got unspoken on your heart? Glad we can take it to the Lord, don't you? Ain't you? Bobby, you remain seated, but you pray for us, okay?
So I'll stand again and sing hymn number 499. I heard an old story, how a Savior came from glory, how he gave his life on Calvary to save a wretch like me. I heard about his groaning, how his precious blood's atonement.
Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for the many blessings. Lord, I pray that you be with the sick and the ones that cannot attend. Lord, I pray that you be with the people that can give and the people that cannot give. We're going to take up this offering. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Forgot. Can't sing today. There are things as we travel this earth shifting sand that transcends all the reason of man. But the things that matter the most, I can't sing today. They can never be held in our hand. I believe in a hill called Mount Calvary. I believe whatever the cost, and when time has surrendered and earth is no more, I'll still cling to the old rugged cross. I believe that the Christ who was slain on that cross has the power to change lives today. For he changed me completely, a new life is mine. That is why by the cross I will stay. I believe in a hill called Mount Calvary. I believe whatever the cost, and when time has surrendered and earth is no more, I'll still cling to the old rugged cross. I believe that this life with its great mysteries surely someday will come to an end. But faith will conquer the darkness and death, and will lead me at last to my friend. I believe in a hill called Mount Calvary. I believe whatever the cost, and when time has surrendered and earth is no more, I'll still cling to that old rugged cross.
All right, ladies, right? Are we ready for this? How are we gonna get them up there?
You want me to go pull them up?
Come
Come on, Lori.
on.
A person gets a chance to stand up and sing to the Lord, and everybody just sits there. I mean,
Come on, ladies. sitting in the front row.
They slowly taking it in.
I'll look here.
Savannah. Oh, did I say your name out loud? Daisy. I didn't mean to call people.
Any place. Come on, girl.
Ellie, you'd be singing for two voices. Again, did I call your name out loud?
If I sing out loud, it'll upset him, so this is weird.
All right. Well, we got all day, just, you know. Take your time.
Why you gotta be so rude?
Last chance. Y'all need to scoot over so he can get you in the camera now.
Hey, we're right here.
Okay, sure. No, I ain't pushing it.
He spread it out, he's got it.
But the first one is 560.
560. I don't have any glasses, I'm not gonna see.
Oh, how I love Jesus.
Is it on?
I don't think so. Is this turn it on?
Oh, it should be on. Check, turn it up a little bit. Check, 1, 2, check, 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 check. It's the one that says red. It's, like 4, 5, 6, something like that. 3, 4. Like I wrote red on it. It's not actually red, it's like I wrote red on it. There you go. It is working. Can anybody hear me? Who's gonna be holding that? Go up singing.
Hey, everybody.
Sorry.
Sit down.
There you go. Why can't y'all just all stand up there so everybody can see you?
We got more sense.
I think we enjoyed this song so much last week, and since today is Baptist Women's Day, here at this church anyway, I've asked them to sing the same song they sang last week, so that's why they're singing the same song that they sang
Ought
last
to be
week.
good by now.
No, they wanted me to tell you that, so, so you would think this is the only song we know, you know?
It's the only one we know, yeah. Come on, you can sing with us.
We'll try. It's alright.
1, 2, 3. I'm only a pilgrim here below, traveling through this weary land. But after a while, oh yes I know, I'll wear white robe in glory land. I'll wear white robe, I'll wear white robe, and sing with the shining bright angel band, just inside the gate where loved ones await. I'll wear white robe in glory land. Though only a beggar I may be, all bleeding and sore, my hands and my feet, the Father above has promised me, I'll wear white robe in glory land. I'll wear white robe, I'll wear white robe, and sing with the shining bright angel band, just inside the gate where loved ones await. I'll wear white robe in glory land. I'll wear white robe, I'll wear white robe, and sing with the shining bright angel band, just inside the gate where loved ones await. I'll wear white robe in glory land.
All right. Thank you, ladies. That was good. We've enjoyed the song today. Like I said, see, well, I mean, we clap for you no matter what, so it's good. All right, we have a special guest today, Miss Laneice Davis, Children's Church. Thank you, Kathy. Sorry about that. How many we got? We're low today. A lot of them's gone. We got. Where you going? You ain't going to Children's Church. No, it's only through 2nd grade, baby. Oh, you gonna help her? Okay. All righty. I was fixing to say, boy, she's pretty big for 2nd grade. She fell. Bless her. Well, look who her grandma is. It kind of makes sense, don't it? All right. Laneice, if you'd like to come on, and that way that'll stop them from talking about me so much. But you come on. A lot of y'all know, y'all have heard this, but you just come on and give your testimony. As I was saying, it was Baptist Women's Day. We appreciate our women, don't we? Well, Ed just said a minute ago. I'm not going to say what Ed said. It wasn't bad, but I was the one that said it. You got to watch those women, but you can't say nothing to them. You just got to watch them. So, Laneice, you come on and just give your testimony and do what the Lord's told you to do. Great. That's awesome. You move around a lot?
No.
Okay. All right.
Well,
You'll be good.
I don't know. This is scary. No, this is scary. This is high.
And don't worry about them over there.
Okay.
They're in the ghetto.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for inviting me and asking me to come. I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. And it's been a while since I've spoken, so y'all just pray for me. The one thing that I want to say from the very, very, very beginning. See, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
It's not me. It's not Tom, my husband, and it's not Caleb. It's God. And people stop me all the time and say things like, man, I wish I had your faith. Man, I wish I had your faith. My faith is probably lower than 99% of the people sitting in this room today. But my promise to you is, if, God forbid, but if you're ever put in a situation, God will give you faith. Faith that you didn't know you had. He gives you strength that you didn't know you had. And hopefully throughout this story, this testimony, you'll see what I'm talking about. So it was May 31st, 2003, and we had planned a camping trip. Caleb was 11 years old and Molly was 7. We were going with Danny and Dreama Farmer. Some of you all probably know them, and Daniel, their son, and Caleb were friends. So we were all going together on this camping trip. Everybody was so excited about this camping trip, except me. And not because I didn't like camping. I love to go camping. And by the way, we camp in tents. I mean, it's like, it's rugged. It's rugged. It's really camping, but I loved it. And Tom's brother, Brant, and Summer, which was Daniel's, they're married now. They were dating at the time, but they went with us. And they were all excited. And I said from the beginning, and when I say this, it was not just I got a bad feeling. It was gut-wrenching deep into my soul that I cannot even describe feeling. And I said, I just don't feel good about this, but we'll go on. So we got there. I had to work till 6, so I got there last. Got there Friday evening. And when I got there, that feeling was just so strong. And I walked the campground and I prayed. And I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. And I ended up every time ending in this open field. And the campsite that we were at was way back there. Like my car couldn't even go. They had to pick me up in a golf cart thing and we had to ford the river. It was back there. And I prayed and prayed. Got up Saturday morning, same thing. Just could not shake it. So all morning Saturday, I got up before everyone else and I walked it again. And I prayed and I prayed. Somehow ended up in that field again, praying. That afternoon, my sister came and her husband, and they had 2 kids at that time, Silas and Bella. And Bella was just a couple months old. So they came, and I even took my sister to the side, and I said, walk this campground with me and pray. I feel funny. I just feel funny. So we did. She had just left. It was probably about 8:30 or so, and they had literally just pulled out to leave. And Dreama was sitting, and Molly and Summer, the 3 of us, or 4 of us, were sitting at the campsite, at the campfire, and Caleb and Daniel was running around. Caleb had a little pocket knife. He was going to whittle a bird call. So he had his pocket knife. And Brant's truck was parked directly in front of me, so and the open field where I had been going to was behind Brant's truck. We were sitting there, and I look up, and I see this limb falling. It was huge. I had enough time to turn to Dreama and say, "Look at that big tree limb." And she turned around to see it, and the tree limb hit. And Brant started waving his arms. And I thought, oh, I said to Dreama, I said, that limb has hit Brant's truck. And then I thought, man, it must have done some damage to that truck. And then I heard Tom. And all I heard was, "Caleb, please don't die." And he was just screaming it over and over. And he was screaming, "Please don't leave me. Please don't leave me. Caleb, you can't." And I'm going to be honest with you. At the beginning, I told you my faith was probably less than most of you all here. So I have to tell this part. Somehow I jumped the campfire. I don't know how I did it, but I jumped up off a bucket and over the top of the campfire. And as I went through the air over the fire, I screamed at the top of my voice, "God, I pray to you. Where are you? What happened?" I prayed. I did everything I could do. I prayed. So why? Well, I get to Caleb, and the tree limb's on top of him, and the boys are trying to get it off of him. He's unconscious, not breathing, or doesn't seem to be breathing. And Tom's just trying to pick him up. Brant's trying to clear the tree limb. We couldn't get to him. And I said, "We need help." So I ran back to the car, because back in those days, you young folks, back in those days, your cell phone was actually mounted inside your car. It was a car phone. And so I had to run back to the truck, and I was trying to dial 911, and it wasn't going through, just nothing. Couldn't get it through. And I was sitting in the truck, and I said, "God, where are you? Why'd you leave me? I don't understand." And I just couldn't understand why you would leave me. And about that time I heard a whimper. And I knew it was Caleb. I heard it. I turned around, and Tom's sitting there holding him in his arms. He gives him to me. We jump in the truck, and we take off. We ended up catching my sister and Dan as they were trying to get out. I mean, when I say it was narrow, and we had to have cars move. It was just traumatic just getting out of the campsite. And we get to the main road, and I get signal. I call 911 and ask the ambulance to meet us at the overpass at 16. Caleb's unconscious. He's not talking, and I'm holding his lifeless body in my hand and wondering where God is. And Caleb starts asking. He comes to a little bit, and he said, "Mama, what happened?" And I said, "Well, a tree limb fell on you, and we're on our way to the hospital." And he said, "Mommy, am I going to die?" And I said, "No, absolutely not. You're not going to die. We're on our way right now." And he said, "Well, then can we pray?" And I said, "Yeah, we better be praying." And he started praying himself out loud. And all he said over and over and over, "God, please don't let me die. God, please don't let me die. Mommy, please don't let me die." And then he fell quiet. And it was a long silence. And I was trying to get him to talk again. And I'll be honest, I said, "Caleb, come on, buddy, let's talk about football." Football, by the way, was his life. That's all he lived for, was sports. Sports, sports, sports. Football, baseball, whatever. But football was his favorite. And I said, "Well, let's talk about football, Caleb." No response. Finally, all of a sudden, he just took a deep breath and he said, "Mama, guess what God told me?" And I said, "What, buddy?" And he said, "God says I'm not going to die, Mama. He said for you to stop worrying, I'm not going to die." Then he started singing Amazing Grace. to the top of his lungs in that truck as we were headed to the ambulance. My 11-year-old son sang Amazing Grace. We get to the ambulance and, of course, go on to Ash Memorial, and Mark Scott was on call. And he come in, and they did x-rays. They didn't have MRIs or CAT scans at that time at Ash. So he did the x-rays and found out that Caleb's left arm was broken and that it needed to be set. He said it's a really bad break, and it needs to be set. We've paged Dr. Jones, but he's not answering the page, so I've paged Tammy Thor, and she's on her way. Well, Tammy came, and they checked him, and she said, yeah, it's a really bad break. And she said, we're trying to get in touch with Dr. Jones. He's going to have surgery. So they walked out, and they were talking in the hall a little bit, and Mark came back in and said, you know what, we're just not comfortable. We know it's a broken arm, but we don't have neurologist here. We don't have doctor, anesthesiologist, a doctor. And just putting him to sleep just in case something else is going wrong, we're just not comfortable. Do you care if we go on to Brenner's? And we said no, so the ambulance took him to Brenner's. We got to Brenner's. It was probably 11 o'clock Saturday night. We get to Brenner's, and they did CAT scan after CAT scan after CAT scan. Caleb kept saying, they're taking me back to the catwalk. It was constant. The doctor just could not get a good look at what he was comfortable with. But finally, he came to us and said, actually, Caleb had a lacerated spleen, a bruised liver, a bruised lung, dislocated shoulder, broken arm, and what's called a brachial plexus injury. Brachial plexus is where you have 5 nerves on each side of your spinal cord that are inside your spinal cord and fan out and feed your arms. That's what gives you the feeling and the motion and all of that. In Caleb's left arm, the tree limb had hit his shoulder and pushed it down, and it had either, at this time, they thought it was either the nerves were stretched, broken, or pulled completely out, but there was so much damage they couldn't tell. They couldn't tell if it was one nerve or all 5 nerves or anywhere in between of the brachial plexus, but he had a blood clot. They were concerned about the blood clot. So they gave him a drug called heparin to thin the blood. Well, actually, before they even did that, they took and tried to do balloon surgery to remove the clot, couldn't get to it. So they ended up giving him a low dose of heparin, but they were concerned with the spleen, and they didn't want to give too much heparin to make his blood too thin because of the spleen. So it was a low dose. Finally got to the PICU, which is Pediatric Intensive Care Unit. Oh, it was probably Sunday morning, I don't know, 9 or 10 o'clock. And we had not slept, we had not stopped until that point. We get to the PICU, and Caleb's kind of, he's been in and out, but he's conscious now, and all day Sunday and Monday, he kind of was eating popsicles and just being a normal 11-year-old kid who didn't want to be in the hospital but didn't know what was going on either. So they had a suction in the intensive care room, and it looked just like what you see at the dentist office, the suction for your mouth. Caleb called it his sucker thing. Every person that walked in that room was introduced to the sucker thing. Granny, I need you. Come over here, please, Granny. She'd come over, and he'd grab her in the face with the suction thing. It was constant. Doctors, he did it to doctors. Yeah, he did it to the nurses. He did it to anybody that walked in the room. Tuesday morning, we're in there, and he's, been goofing off. And he said, Mama, I feel funny. And I said, well, here, get your sucker thing. And I handed him his sucker thing, and he dropped it. And I said, well, Caleb? I handed it back to him. He dropped it. And he said, Mama, my bed's falling. My bed's falling. Catch me, I'm falling. I said, Caleb, you're not falling. You're fine. So the nurse ran and got the doctor. Long story short, he was scheduled to have his arm set Tuesday afternoon. And so they said, let's just take him on down now. This is Tuesday morning. Let's take him down now. We'll put him to sleep. And we'll run some tests before we do the surgery and see if there's anything else going on, but we think he's just tired. And I said, okay. So they took him down. Tom and I walked down to the waiting area, and we were sitting there, hadn't been there long, and a doctor came out and called us by name, and we walked over to him, and his first question was, "Do you believe in God?" And we said, "Absolutely, 100%. He said, "Well, then what I'm about to tell you is going to make sense." He said, "I'm the anesthesiologist, and I was putting your child to sleep." And he said, "I had done everything except there was one last button to push or something, one last thing that I needed to do." And he said, "I stopped and prayed, and God stopped me. And he told me, do not put this child to sleep." He said, I can't. I just can't. He said, "The doctor will be out to talk to you soon, and they'll figure out what they're going to do from here, but I will not put this child to sleep. God stopped me." So we sat in the waiting room thinking, what's going on? The next thing we knew, his main doctor, Dr. Turner, come running in, and he said, "Come with me now." And he took us back in the sterile part. I knew it was bad when you go past those sterile doors. And Caleb was laying there in a bed, and I was watching the pulse ox, which should be, obviously perfect as 100. His was dropping and dropping and dropping. And Caleb said, "I can't breathe." And I looked at the doctor and I said, "I don't think he's breathing. It's down to 70 now. I don't think he's breathing." He said, "No, he's not. He's not breathing good, but we wanted you to come in and talk to him for just a minute before we take him back, do whatever." And I said, "Well, yeah, but he's not breathing. It's not time for me to talk to him. It's time for you to help him. It's dropping. He's not breathing." And Caleb grabbed my hand and he said, "Mama, please breathe for me." And I looked at the doctor, and that's when it clicked with me. He said, "You need to say what you need to say to him right now, and then you need to leave. But we want to give you an opportunity one last time to say anything you want to say." And that's when it hit me what he was saying. He wanted us to say goodbye. So I just leaned over and I kissed Caleb on his forehead. And I said, "I'll see you in a few minutes, buddy. Doctor's going to help you." And we left. We went out in the waiting room, and we hit our knees in a crowded waiting room at Baptist Hospital. Just Tom and myself. The family was still back in the PICU. And we didn't just pray. We begged. We pleaded. We shouted. We begged forgiveness of every sin we could possibly think of that we had done. I racked my brain. God, what have I done? Why are you punishing me? What have I done? I'm so sorry. I mean, I knew there were millions of sins for me to choose from, but which one was it? Which sin was it that put me here? And about that time, a man walked over that was with another family, and he said, "I'm a pastor. Do you care if I pray with you?" And I said, "Are you kidding? Please pray." And that other patient's family, I think their child was there taking their tonsils out or something. And they came and they prayed with us, and it was just the sweetest spirit in that prayer. It's like I kind of caught my breath for a second. And I tell you that to say, if God leads you to pray with someone, please do it. That man was sent from God without a doubt. Anyway, finally the family has come back down, and we're on the waiting room, and the doctor comes out and says, "Well, we've discovered what was wrong. The brachial plexus injury, at least 3 or more of the nerves have been jerked completely out of the spinal cord. When we gave him the heparin for the blood clot, his blood has become a little bit too thin, and it bled back through those tiny nerve openings, and he has, for those of you in the medical field that would know, he has it's called a subdural hematoma of the spinal cord, which means there was a blood clot inside the spinal cord itself. And he said, we've called an orthopedic surgeon, and he's on his way, but I can't make any promises that he'll live. And he certainly will never walk again, but we're going to do everything we can. That was probably about 6 o'clock. And all of a sudden, people from Ashe County just started showing up in the waiting room. And like I said, we didn't have cell phones then. We hadn't called anyone. They just felt led. And that waiting room was filled with people from Ashe County. So we had waited and waited, and it had been hours. And I knew where the entrance to that surgical suite was. I knew where my boy was. I knew what door he was through. I also knew I couldn't get through it without one of those cards that you swipe. So I went as far as I could, and I got to that door. And I sat on my knees in front of that door, and I prayed. And oddly enough, I felt guilty because I thought, how many other children are back behind these doors? So I remember distinctly saying, God, I don't want to take away from anybody else's baby. But you can do all things. And all I need you to do is walk by the room that Caleb is in, and if you'll just let the hem of your garment touch that threshold to that door, my baby will live. If you'll just touch it with the hem of your garment. You don't even have to go in. You know, I was trying to reason with God here. I was trying to make my case. And I'm sitting here. I don't know how long I'd sit there, but all of a sudden my dad come up behind me. And he just wrapped his arms around me. I didn't even look up. I just felt his arms around me, and he was holding me, and it felt like he was just squeezing so tight, but it felt so good. It was so comforting. And he just held me like that for a long time and kind of rocked back and forth, and just the sweetest peace. Even though, you know, I thought, wow, Dad, you've hugged me a million times, but this hug was different. It was so different, and it was so much better than any hug he had ever given me, and I was feeling my strength come back. I was feeling so good. And I turned around to thank him or to speak to him, and there was no one there. And I remember saying, God, is that you? Because I could still feel the arms. But he wasn't that. I didn't see anything with my eyes. And for the first time in my entire life, I physically, literally, inside my head, heard the voice of God. And he said, it is I, and you're my baby, and I'm here for you. Your baby's okay. Our baby's okay. The baby I'm sharing with you is okay. But you're my baby, and you're my concern right now. And I'm here for you. And I've never left you. I wasn't gone at the campsite. I was right beside you. And I'm hurting as bad as you are. And we're going to get through this together. And I remember saying to him, I was having a full-on conversation with God here. And I said, but God, how much longer? Because by now it's midnight. I said, God, how much longer? And he said, not long. And I heard my sister. And she said, Laneice, the surgeon is in the waiting room. We've been looking everywhere for you. He wants to talk to you. So I go in, and he said that he had gone in and removed, done a partial laminectomy, which basically the spinal cord like this, he cut it in half, sucked out the blood clot. He said, but your son is quadriplegic, which means nothing from the neck down. He's not going to breathe on his own. He's not going to be able to move his arms or his legs. You're going to require help. There's groups that we can get. So we'll call those people in to help you. And I remember, and my mom still laughs about it because she remembers it distinctly. I pushed Tom. Tom was here and somebody else. Anyway, I pushed him out of my way. And it felt like I was like nose to nose with this orthopedic surgeon that I'd never met before in my life. And I remember my finger going up. And I said, oh, no, he isn't. And he said, well, denial's the first step of grief. And I said, you're not understanding. This isn't grief. This is God. He is not quadriplegic. And he said, well, I'm going to let you rest, and I'll be back to see him in the morning. That was at midnight. At 6 o'clock the next morning, that same doctor walked into Caleb's room. You know how they do. How's it going? How was your night? Are you feeling any better? And Tom said, actually, we're feeling pretty good. And he said, come over here, Doc. I want to show you something. And he pulled the covers back, and Caleb was awake. And Tom said, Caleb, kick this doctor that said you'd never move again. And it was weak, but he picked his foot up off the bed and kicked the doctor. And the doctor broke in tears. And he said, I will tell you right now, I'm a doctor, medical doctor. I was physically, literally inside this child's spinal cord. I saw the damage. It wasn't a test result. It was me looking at it physically. This is a miracle. He said, the great physician has stepped in this room. And then he just broke, and he said, I can't even stay in here right now. I'll be back later. He just left. So things went well. But obviously the neck had been cut in half, so moving his head was just a complete, absolutely, we cannot let his head move. So he was in a hard collar. They decided to do a halo. And a halo was, at that time, it was a vest that Caleb would wear, and it had two rods that come up the side of the shoulder blades, and literally a ring around his head with those rods attached to it. And inside the ring, there are 4 pins, 2 in the back and 2 in the front, that they screw in just under the skin and attach to the skull, and it stops any movement from his neck whatsoever. So they had decided to do that. It was exactly a week later. It was Tuesday, June the 10th. They were going to go place the halo. They said it's standard procedure. There's no big deal. Won't take us about 30 minutes. He'll be back up here while he's under. We'll go ahead and set his left arm. Everything's be fine. Y'all don't even need to come down. Just stay here in the PICU. So we said, okay. We were there, and the phone rings, and it's the nurse from the OR, and she said, Caleb is finished with his surgery and everything is okay. And I said to her, what are you not telling me? And she said, I'm telling you everything. She got a little snippy. She said, I'm telling you everything that I'm supposed to tell you. He is okay, and he will be in his room. And I said, okay. So Caleb came up, and the nurse was checking him, and by this time we had become friends with all the nurses at the PICU and gotten pretty close with them. So Caleb comes in, and I looked at the nurse, and I said, something's not right. And she said, he's fine. And she got the flashlight and checked his eyes. She said, he's fine. He's still groggy, but he's fine. And I said, would you care to check his eyes one more time for me? I just don't feel good. I just don't feel good. And he was on this bed with a motor. The mattress had a special motor to keep it blowed up. The bed was extremely heavy. You could hardly move it. It was terrible. And she took the flashlight, checked his eyes the second time. And she didn't say anything. She just took the flashlight and threw it. And she ran out the door. And the next thing I know, there's a nurse coming and does a jumps up on the bed, straddles Caleb, and she has one of those things that you put the mask on their face and you're pumping it. And she was pumping that. And they were unhooking machines. And the nurse by herself started just pushing Caleb's bed down the hall. And in a dead sprint with the other nurse on top pumping him. No one said anything to us. They just took off with him. And there we were. And finally, one of the doctors come in and said, we're not sure what's going on, but something is wrong. You're right. We're taking him downstairs. We'll find out. So the next thing I know, I'm sitting in Caleb's room in the PICU, and the chaplain walks in. I knew we hadn't requested a chaplain. So I knew someone else had. So I knew it was bad. And then the doctor come in and he said, if what I suspect has happened, I need you to prepare yourself because your little boy won't be coming back. He said, I feel like maybe with the halo, one of the pins have gone through the skull into the brain. And if that's the case, there's really nothing we can do because it would take a team of neurosurgeons in a room already fixed, already ready to go, and we would have to just wheel Caleb straight into that room immediately. And that would be his only shot at making it. So you need to prepare yourself. And Tom, at that point, just ran out of the room. He just left. I don't know where he went. He was gone for a good 10 minutes or so, and I was sitting in the room with the nurse and the chaplain and a couple nurses, and it was just dead silence. All I could hear was the sound of my foot shaking up and down because I couldn't make it stop. And Tom finally came back, and he said, he pulled me out in the hall, and he looked at me. It didn't even look like Tom. I mean, I can't even describe it. I can still see it. It did not even look like my husband. His voice did not even sound like my husband. And he looked at me and he said, when Caleb gets back up here, he is not to come back in this room. There is death in this room. The devil is in that room, and Caleb will not be put back in it. And I said, Tom, I can't just go in there and tell them that. And he looked at me, he said, you can and you will, and I mean it. And it was like it wasn't even Tom speaking. It was the strangest thing. So I went in the room and I told the nurses what had happened. And I said, Tom doesn't want Caleb to come back in this room. And I literally watched the color drain from those nurses' faces. I mean, they just turned pale. And they said, he won't be put back in that room. If he makes it back up here, we will not put him in the room. We'll move him. Come to find out later, that room was the room where they put the patients that were the worst case. And the nurses had actually nicknamed that room the room of death. And we had no clue. Obviously, they didn't tell us that. But the nurse was telling me, she said, I thought I was going to pass out. How in the world Tom knew that? I said, I'll tell you how Tom knew that. God told him, and there was nothing in that room God couldn't have overcome. Caleb didn't need to be moved to be saved. But Tom and I needed that. You know, we needed to know God is speaking to you. So he came back, and he was in a coma. He was on a ventilator. He had one tube down one nostril going into his stomach to feed him. He had another tube in the other nostril going down, pumping the acid out of his stomach. He was on the ventilator. That was down in his mouth. Ventilator. He had tubes checking his temperature up his bottom. There was not really any open holes that did not have some kind of tube stuck in it. And he was lifeless. And he was in a coma. They told us that he would probably remain in that coma. And that, again, there were support groups. They would get us the pin, the back right pin of the halo had indeed gone through the skull into the brain, and there was a blood clot on the brain. They had removed as much of the clot as they possibly could, but we were just waiting. So he was in the coma, and at that point we were staying at the Ronald McDonald House by now. So I walked to the Ronald McDonald House with Tom, and Caleb had been in a coma for 9 days. And God sent so many people. I could stay here all day, but I'm not going to take much of your time here. But just when I tell you God is real, let me tell you, God is so real. One thing that I do want to prove to you or say to you, I was outside and this gentleman was he was a contractor working on the building, and he came up to me and he said, I want to show you this picture. He said, are you Caleb Davis's mama? And I said, how did you know that? And he said, that's not important. I just want to show you a picture. And he handed me a picture, and it was a horse with a colt, a baby with it. And I said, is that your horse? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, that's a pretty horse, you know. Handed him the picture back, and he handed it back to me. He said, I mean for you to look at this picture. And I looked, and printed down at the bottom in little small letters, it said, Little Miss Molly. Well, my daughter's name is Molly, and at that time she was 7, and that's what we all called her, was Little Miss Molly. And I said, that's my daughter's name, and that's what we call her. And he said, I know that. That's what I wanted you to see. And he said, now that I have your attention, I have a message. I said, okay. And he said, there are thousands and thousands of angels around the throne of God. And he said, and at this very, very minute, you need to know, they're all speaking the name Caleb Davis. And God is with you. And I didn't know what to do. So I just walked off. I saw him the next day. Same man. Walked up to him to say hi. You know, we had just had this meaningful conversation, and he looked at me as if he didn't even know me. And I said, hey. And he said, hey, how are you? And just kept walking. And I noticed there was a lady sitting, and she was crying hard and visibly upset. And I watched that man walk over to that lady, sit down beside of her, and hand her a picture. And so I knew God was using this man. This man was an angel, there's no doubt. So I went to the Ronald McDonald House that night, and I sat on the porch and I prayed. And I had gotten to the point where, honestly, I couldn't even pray anymore. I don't know if you've ever been there, but that's a scary place. And I prayed and I prayed, and I said, God, please. And this image popped in my mind. And I saw Caleb and me, and we were standing on this cliff. And I had Caleb by the hands, and he was hanging over the cliff, and I was holding him. And again, I heard that voice in my head, loud. It was real. And he said, do you trust me? Do you have faith in me? And I said, Lord, I trust you. Lord, I have faith. But what if my faith isn't good enough? What if I don't have enough faith? That's what concerns me, is that I don't have enough faith. And he said, you misunderstood the question. I didn't ask how much faith you had. I asked if you believe in me. I'm not talking about your faith. Do you believe I can heal your son? Yes or no? And I said, Lord, I believe you. I believe you can. He said, then turn loose. And I said, but God, if I turn loose, he's going to fall. I'm holding him over this cliff. If I turn loose, he's going to fall. He said, turn loose. So I turned loose, and all of a sudden, Caleb fell. And I couldn't see the bottom. It was dark. I couldn't see. Caleb was gone. And the next thing I saw in my mind was Caleb slowly rising up. And he just floated, and sat right beside of me. And God said, you need to go back, and I will show you my mercy. Go back to the PICU, and I will show you my mercy. So we went back, and my mom was with Caleb, and I walked into the PICU, and there's sliding glass doors that, you can see, and windows it's all glass. And I walked into Caleb's room, and there was a new doctor standing outside. And I said, Mama, who's that new doctor? And she said, I don't know, Laneice. He's been here all morning. This is probably about 6 o'clock. She said, he's been there probably all night. She said, he's not moved. He's just standing there. He had brown hair, a blue shirt, a black tie, a white jacket, khaki pants, brown shoes, sandy brown hair, and he was just standing there with his hands folded in front of him, just staring at Caleb. So I said, Mom, I'm going to go outside, and I'm going to ask him, what he's doing. Why is he just standing there? So I walk out of the PICU, and the man is not there. And I came back in, and I said, Mom, he's not there. And she said, yes, he is. Look, he's standing right there. I said, no, Mom, he's really not there. And so she walked out, and she came back in. Of course, we were both bawling our eyes out crying, because it occurred to me the man we were seeing was not outside. He was inside Caleb's room. And we were seeing a reflection. And I said, Mom, he's in here. And so the nurses came. They moved Caleb's bed. They turned off lights. They turned off the hall lights. They rearranged furniture. The image of this man would not change, no matter what they did. Nurses saw it. Doctors saw it. Therapists saw it. Other patients' families would ask if they could come in Caleb's room to see the angel. He never changed. He never moved. He stayed for 48 hours. Those were the 48 hours that were so hard. You would think that you heard Caleb talking. You'd be sitting there. You'd think you heard his voice. You would doze off to sleep. And right before you woke up, you would think it was a dream. And then you'd wake up and face reality. But that man stayed and he never moved. And so finally, at the end of 48 hours, I walked into Caleb's room and the man was gone. He was just not there anymore. He was just completely gone. And my mom said, no, he was right there. I mean, like literally he just left. I mean, he was right there. That afternoon, my dad came to visit. And he was back in the room with Caleb. Caleb was still in the coma, and they told us he'd never wake up, or if he did, he wouldn't recognize us. Dad was back there with him. And all of a sudden, the nurse busts open the door to the waiting room at the PICU, and she said, come back here, quick, quick, quick. And then she stopped, and she said, it's good, but come back fast. So we all went flying back there. She let the entire family go back there at the same time, and we went back there, and Caleb was still laying in the bed, and my dad, I can still see him. He was just rubbing his face like this, and he was pacing back and forth, and tears just streaming. And I said, what's going on? And Dad said, come over here and watch this. And he leaned over to Caleb, and he said, Caleb, the next time one of those doctors come in here and try to wake you up, try to tell you to squeeze their hand. That's all they would say. Squeeze my hand. Caleb, squeeze my hand. And they would hit him so hard right here in his throat, trying to get him to wake up. And Dad said, the next time a doctor comes in here and tells you to squeeze their hand, what are you going to do? And his eyes opened. And even though the ventilator was in his mouth, his little tongue stuck out. Dad said, you're going to stick your tongue out at those doctors, aren't you? He just rolled his eyes. And he actually started talking over the ventilator. I mean, he just woke up and was talking. And I remember I leaned over to him and I kissed him and I said, Caleb, I love you so much. I'm so glad. I've been waiting for you to wake up and I love you so much. And he said, where's my daddy? And so, of course, Tom was there, and he began to just flourish. And then that night, he asked us, he said, where's that doctor at that stayed in my room with me, Mama? That one with the blue shirt and the white coat. He was so nice to me. Where's he at? And that's when I knew that man had been with my son the entire time. He had never left us. He had stayed with us. And I'm here to tell you, if you are ever in a situation, I promise you, I've seen it myself. God will work miracles. You'll see miracles happen. You'll never, ever, ever, ever doubt the power of God and Jesus again. I mean, down to simple things as walking to the Ronald McDonald House one night and I looked down at my shoes and I thought, I've walked a lot of places in my life and these are the hardest steps I've ever had to take. And I remember, I didn't even say anything to Tom, just in my mind, I said, God, will you please just lighten my steps? Will you just lighten my steps? The next morning, we went back to Caleb's room, and a test result had come back positive that they thought he had some kind of bad infection, and it had came back that he didn't. So I was on my way out to the waiting room to tell the family, test results came back. Actually, he doesn't have that bad infection. We're good. And I bumped into a resident. And he said, where are you going? And I said, oh, the test came back negative. Caleb doesn't have that infection. And he said, I just looked at you when you walked out that room, and the first thing that ran through my mind was, boy, somebody sure has lightened her steps today. And I mean, it was things like that constantly. One night, I had gone to get a drink out of the drink machine, scrounged around in my wallet, finally found quarters to get me a drink. I didn't have any cash. Walked back into the waiting room, and there was a little family that was in there from a different country. I think it was Guam, some little country. Anyway, and they had been their child had been airlifted to America through some charity to have heart surgery. And they were in the waiting room, and as I started to go in, they never left. They never left the waiting room. They spoke very little English, and they would use the microwave. So anyway, I walked back into Caleb's room, or was walking into the PICU, and God spoke to me and said, "You need to give them some money." And I said, "Okay, let me run back to in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, let me run back to Tom and get some money. I didn't have any money. And he said, "No, give them what you've got in your wallet." And I stopped there at the door, and I was praying, and I said, "God, I don't have any money in my wallet, but I'm feeling you telling me to give these people money. I'm confused." And it just kept over and over, "Give them what's in your wallet." So I walked in the PICU, and I opened up my wallet, and there was a $20 bill. I know it wasn't there when I was at the drink machine because I pulled everything out. But I gave them the $20 bill and said, "God told me to give you this." And the next day they came to me. Well, it wasn't the next day. It was a couple weeks later. They came to me and they said, "That $20 you gave us fed the children in our village for a week. And we sent that money to our village. And every day at 12 o'clock, they all go to the village and meet and pray. And today they're praying for Caleb Davis." So a little village in Guam met to pray for Caleb Davis. And all of you all praying for him. And I know I've left stuff out. I know I've probably been a little longer than I should have been too. So I will step away. But just know that's the main thing. We were not where we needed to be spiritually when this happened. And we're definitely not where we need to be spiritually now. No one is. We're human. But I promise you, God will give you the grace and the strength and the faith when you need it. And it will be more than you ever expected. I promise.
Heads bowed and eyes closed. Ask Edith just to play something softly here for just a moment. Might be somebody here this morning. This is why this took place the way it did. But we may be here this morning and just overwhelmed, just unable to handle something you might be going through. I'm not even going to ask you to raise your hand or anything like that. I know there is. So we'll just take Laneice's advice and trust the Lord. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we just come before you today and hearing this incredible story, this incredible testimony. But we know, Lord, there's just countless of evidence of miracles all the time. So I pray, Lord, that person today who needs that miracle, Lord, I pray that they'd receive it today. But Lord, we pray for your will, because we understand that when you move, when you operate, you have a purpose. So God, we pray that that purpose will be accomplished. Just want to tell you that we love you today. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.